All right, and we are live. Welcome to ALN's coverage of week 5 of the election campaign. We've got a week to go, so we're almost there. It's been 6 weeks, so all up, we're 5 weeks in. So, yeah, it's coming to the last stretch of the election campaign. I wanted to start off with a bit more of a fun story because there's been a lot of controversial stuff this week, some transgender issues, race issues. But I guess start us off with the article that you wrote during the week, in fact, just yesterday, in fact, on Drew Pavlo and the Kim Jong-Un impersonator. If you want to just explain it, because I haven't had a chance to read the article yet. So if you want to just go over that, I guess.
Yeah, sure. So we wrote about it on the ALN website, so you can check it out there. But Drew Pavlo has struck again. Now he's beginning to gain that persona of the larrikin, who the troublemaker on the election campaign, who's really is getting quite a bit of traction with his stunts. I guess you'd call them, protests. One could say the previous one got him embroiled in quite a bit of controversy with the sign saying F Xi Jinping, which he was brandishing on the streets of Sydney. I believe it was in Chinatown in Sydney. So, quite a provocative move is the way to describe it. And some don't agree with those tactics. Personally, I think it is exactly the statement that he's trying to make, which is this is Australia and we have Australian values. And if you don't like it, then you're in the wrong country, I guess, is the statement. But it was very much of a statement of we can criticize our leaders, and we do it openly in this country. And God, do they criticize Scott Morrison? So they should, right? Anyway, so this week he's done another stunt, and an even more impressive stunt, if you ask me. He's hired Kim Jong-Un impersonator, who is super impressive. I don't know if you saw any of the photos, Stu, but he is very much a Kim Jong-Un lookalike, down to the body framing, down to the portly stature. He's incredibly accurate. The hair, the look, it's all there. The only thing that really lets it down is the Australian accent, right? So when he talks, you're kind of like, what is it? But so at the Prime Minister's press conference shortly after the Prime Minister had left yesterday at Exetel manufacturing facilities, I believe it's in Sydney. It's the Gladys Liu is the MP. Yeah, that's a New South Wales seat.
Yes, it is.
Gladys Liu, I believe, has come under fire for being too connected to the Communist Party in China. I believe that's the criticism leveled against her. I'm not 100% sure on how entangled she is in all that, but it was very much that was the statement that was being made by the impersonator, that Gladys Liu is a fan of Xi Jinping and that she supports his authoritarian and communistic ways, one could say. So, as I mentioned, it was a Prime Minister's press conference. Prime Minister had left the scene, and shortly after, the impersonator arrived to the press waiting there. And it's kind of a bit confusing or a bit interesting to me that the press was still all there, even though the Prime Minister had left. I would imagine once that Prime Minister is out of there, press is gone. Like, they don't mess about. They're out of it. They've got another campaign event to go to. But interestingly, they were all gathered around as this impersonator came to the scene and began to make these statements about Gladys Liu and her ties to the Communist Party. There was an interesting altercation with what appeared to be a handler of some sort, maybe an aide to Gladys Liu. I'm not 100% sure. Didn't look like a journalist, but the journalist, this person, a man, said to the impersonator, "This is the most offensive thing I've ever seen. You have to leave." And then the Kim Jong-Un impersonator brilliantly replied with, "You don't tell the Supreme Leader what to do." And instantly this offended man just went, "Okay," and said nothing more. It was completely just like a slightest pushback, and he melted like butter. So the scene kind of evolved from there, where the journalist trying to in a sinister kind of way, ascertain the person's identity. There was this weird interaction between multiple journalists saying, "What's your name? What's your name? What's your name?" As if they needed to know the personal details of this impersonator, this protester, essentially, to dox them or to get them in trouble with authorities. It really kind of epitomizes the journalistic landscape of today. That was kind of their first thing, was, how do we find out who you are so we can damage you, get you in trouble with authority? That was the only journalistic response to the event, essentially. But shortly after that, the impersonator left the facility and was confronted by the Victorian police. I believe there was no arrests or charges made. There was allegations.
So, Victorian police?
Yes. Sorry, Victorian police? Might have been New South Wales police. I need to double check that. But obviously, if it's Gladys Liu's seat, she's a New South Wales MP, right?
Yes.
Is that correct? Yeah. So it'd be New South Wales police. And I believe allegations were made that his entry during his entry to the facility, that he had to push somebody out of the way. I can't verify that. I don't know the truth or the validity of that statement, but those were the allegations being thrown around by Sky News. So pinch of salt with that one. But quite a humorous, interesting little story here. A little bit of a gem amongst the shit that we deal with in terms of the election campaign. A little lovely troll, and something I wholeheartedly condone is these kind of viral moments that point to bigger issues in the campaign, which I think we can speak about later. With the Chinese intelligence vessels straying into Australian waters, there's really are large implications to this campaign. Whether or not they're valid criticisms of Gladys Liu, I think that's up for debate. There's clearly attempts by the Communist Party of China to interfere in Australian politics. And so these issues need to be addressed, and I don't think they are addressed in any meaningful way by the political class. So it kind of leaves it up to the jokers in the pack, like Drew Pavlo, to do this, which he's doing very effectively. So what was have you seen the photo of the impersonator?
I have just now. I'll pull it up on stream. I turns out I was incorrect. She's in Melbourne.
Right.
I've confused my Liberal controversies from this week, and so I thought she was Sydney, but she's in Melbourne. Apparently, her seat, Chisholm, is 20% Chinese right. Australian.
Yeah, Chisholm is a very ethnically diverse area, and it's kind of that urban cluster where immigration tends to lead.
Well, yeah, obviously there's been allegations of ties to China. There was a Chinese spy that she met several times and denied meeting him. She's had ties to, I'm trying to remember its name now. There was a corporation that was involved in money laundering, which was Chinese, and she was involved with that. She's had ties to the World Trade Union Federation or whatever. I think that's what it's called, WTUF, and it's tied to a Chinese intelligence front. So she obviously has plenty of connections to the Chinese. It's just, is it nefarious or is it just innocent? Although if it's the Chinese involved, I don't expect it to be innocent ties. I think both parties have had ties to China, plus Clive Palmer as well. So who's on their payroll? Who's not on the payroll? Actually, the easy question to be asked: who's not on their payroll?
Yeah, right. That's one way to look at it. It's a big issue, and I think it it sends, there's a subconscious element to it that resonates in the electorate of foreign interference, especially an authoritarian foreign interference that we need to be wary of. And we're not, no one in the political, no party is talking about this or really acknowledging it. I guess with the exception yesterday of another story. So you're bringing up, yes.
Yeah, I've got the picture just there. Yeah, it's very accurate.
Yeah, incredibly accurate. So, yeah, this is the gaggle of journalists, I want to call them. I'm not sure anyone was doing journalism with that impersonator, though. They were just, it was a bully. It was kind of like they were bullying him into giving his personal information away. And it was quite an odd way to interact. I mean, it's a strange thing where they don't need to cover this, right? But they are compelled to cover it just because of the oddity of the event. And yet they find themselves, because they will cover it, they have to dig into the personal information of the impersonator. And they can't just cover it from a purely journalistic stance of reporting the story in the event. There was this attitude of, let's get him. Who is he? What's his name, so we can get him? It was odd. But I wanted to pivot perhaps from this story, in terms of foreign interference issues. I don't know if you heard the story yesterday going around. Peter Dutton had announced there was a Chinese intelligence vessel off the coast of WA. Have you heard this?
Yeah, so it was picked up by one of the naval, was it naval? One of the naval stations on the coast, which is ironic because, the station was called the Harold E. Holt naval base. And, very ironic though. There's even a swimming pool named after Harold Holt. So go figure there, you're going to jinx yourself with that. But yes, I did hear about that. It was surveillance, wasn't it? Wasn't it a surveillance ship vessel?
Yeah, they're saying intelligence gathering operations. And they're kind of questioning the timing in terms of the election. And it is interesting timing, right? Provocative timing. I'm not sure it's in the motivations for the Chinese Communist Party to keep the conservatives in power, though. So if anything, doing this would sway votes to conservative, I would imagine, to conservative leaning politicians, and Australia first, I guess, nationalistic politicians. So yeah, there's a map that shows the trajectory and how close this vessel came to the coastline. It was off the coast of WA. It might have, I think it started in Northern Territory, but to me, it looks 100% that this vessel was in Australian waters, which I thought was it is. Yeah, which I thought was illegal or not allowed. Like, isn't there some kind of policy in place that says you can't just come into Australian waters with clearly a foreign what's the word, confrontational force? What's your take on this? Is this a provocative act?
It'd definitely be a threat to Australian sovereignty. Definitely, if you got Chinese ships freely patrolling our coastline, I guess the justification behind it would probably be, or for justification behind why they did this, to support the LNP. Because as you said, this will drive votes to the Liberals, because the Liberals are stronger on China than Labor is, of course. I guess it's it's probably part of their policy of brinksmanship, which would be to force Australia to side with America overtly, and then that catch us out for basically, drive us into the US corner, and then when the USA collapses, we are forced to seek refuge with them. I guess could be one justification for it, because the way the US is going right now, I don't expect them to be around for too much longer. The way they're going with their constantly protesting and like, I don't expect them to stay over too long. I think the average length of a country's age is 250 years, and they've been around for about that long. So they're on their way out. The US is, and I guess by driving us into the US corner, it forces us to eventually have to rebound really hard to China. I guess that's just my first thoughts on that story. But it definitely is very oddly timed, I guess, to see this right before the election. There's going to be some. I always look to see if there's a bigger motive there, and there is. Obviously, it's like a week before the election, and they found a Chinese vessel off the coast. That's obviously planned. So I guess the question then becomes: did they want us to see the ship? Because if it's a surveillance ship, then you'd know that it'd obviously have radar cloaking technologies and stuff attached to it. So did they want us to see the ship? And then you have to start asking questions like that, and then you go down a rabbit hole of conspiracies.
I don't think there's any other way to interpret this as they wanted to, because they got so close. They wanted it to be seen. They wanted the statement to be made, and it's super provocative. And I'm again at a loss, and this is why people like Drew Pavlou seem to be doing such important work at this stage. It's like, how is our governments just, I guess they're doing things behind the scenes in response, but it feels the public is kind of left hanging, waiting for them to be in a sort of defensive stance about this, and to stand up for our sovereignty, essentially. It's shocking. It's super shocking to see this kind of go unchallenged almost. Dutton has talked in very measured words, and the Prime Minister even more measured. I believe the strongest wording was aggressive, right? So,
yes,
that's kind of, well, I guess that's politics, right? That's kind of politics 101, is you don't get too heated, you don't put too much emotive language into the debate, and you do it behind the scenes. But this is not behind the scenes anymore. This comes after, I believe in December, there was a military engagement where a Chinese vessel shined a laser.
the laser incident. Yeah, that was. Yes, I know that one.
And so increasingly provocative, and increasingly like, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? It's like they're poking.
It's the exact same thing. It's the exact same thing as Putin did to Ukraine. He sat there for 4 months on the border, waiting for them to pull the trigger, I guess. And it's the exact same with China and for Taiwan. It's the exact same situation. They're trying to push other countries to declare war on them or take actions against them, because then they're the defenders. They're not the aggressors. Then it makes the rest of the world look bad. But the question is, there is some credibility to the statement by Peter Dutton that it is a act of aggression, because if it's went into our territorial borders, I obviously haven't seen the map, so how far it goes in, I don't know. But if it's within our territorial waters, it has to be innocent passage. I believe the wording is for the international charter. It has to be innocent passage. Obviously, if it's a surveillance ship, it's not innocent. So there's definitely some sort of nefarious purpose here.
It's
malicious intent.
It's scary. And I guess, excuse me, I don't imagine we've heard the last of this. I imagine this will have ramifications moving forward. It does worry me that they were on the precipice of a Labor socialist government at the federal level, and how they will manage these sort of issues moving forward. Can we entrust them with our sovereignty at this crucial stage? It really is challenging for them, I imagine, to project strength internationally. And I mean, I don't see Albo as that kind of leader.
Well, wasn't that a story that came out just, I think it was last night or this morning, about that independent in the ACT running for Senate too was Chinese backed as well. So, they're trying to get in as many sides as they can, as many different angles to try and protect their own interests in Australia. Because again, it's all about brinksmanship with China. That's been their underlining policy for the last, I want to say, 20 years. When did Xi Jinping get in power? Last 20 odd years.
Yeah. I mean, on record, China, I believe, have never started a hot war. I believe. Feel free to fact check me on that, people, in the comments.
Except the Civil War, of course. Except for that Civil War.
Yeah.
Yes, you're correct.
And so on record that, I think that they kind of rely upon to get up there to their mischievous ways. They've never been the antagonist. Excuse me.
I guess the exception there is Tibet in the 1950s, but
yeah,
technically speaking, Tibet wasn't a sovereign country because when the Chinese Empire collapsed in 1911 and Tibet got independence, it didn't try and work with any other countries to get them to recognize it. So then when the PRC invaded, they couldn't obviously rely on any alliances because they hadn't done anything to really reach out to anyone else. So they collapsed then. So I guess that's the only thing I could think of would be Tibet and Taiwan, and neither of those are recognized because thanks to China, the rest of the world won't touch those issues. So any wars they do start, or any violence that does go on from them, the rest of the world won't do anything about it because of what China's done to isolate those countries from the rest of the world. Even Hong Kong as well, because China has so much control there. You can't really call that an invasion of a sovereign state either, because China's got that much influence over the government. They can basically get basically news networks. There was a news network that was shut down last year by the Chinese government just because they thought it was a threat because it was pro-democracy. Actually, there were two different news independent media outlets that were shut down by the government last year because there were threats to Chinese authority in Hong Kong.
That's a great segue to something I wanted to talk about too, which was Kevin Rudd. Speaking of authoritarians who want to shut down media networks, Kevin Rudd had an interesting altercation with a journalist yesterday. I don't know if you saw this. Did you see the video?
Not the video, but I did hear about it though.
So I've got some of the details. I don't have So Kevin Rudd was on the campaign trail supporting a candidate for the Labor Party, of course. And he was confronted by a Sky News journalist. And if anyone doesn't know, Kevin Rudd is a massive fan of Murdoch media. He just loves the Murdoch press and he can't get enough of them. He has an absolute disdain for Murdoch media. I'm joking, clearly. The interaction was very antagonistic. The journalist was being quite courteous and polite and engaging with quite valid questions of Kevin Rudd. And all Kevin Rudd had in response was, well, you're a Murdoch press representative, so nothing you say can be taken seriously. That was the only response he had to the journalist on the campaign trail. And he did this thing where he used the crowd behind him, the Labor campaign volunteers, to sort of harass and intimidate the journalist and to sort of gang up. It was this really sort of playground mentality of, hey, everyone, get him sort of thing. And it was seriously, it reinforced my impression of Kevin Rudd, that he is a deeply undemocratic individual who doesn't believe in the freedom of the press to express, free thought, and has a serious chip on his shoulder from his time in the Prime Minister, in the role of leader of the Labor Party, and his short stint as Prime Minister, where he effectively blames his downfall on the Murdoch media. and their kind of attitude towards his rule. So I believe the MP he was campaigning for was the MP that questioned the AstraZeneca vaccine, and that was the question that journalists leveled at Kevin Rudd. So I don't know if you know who that MP is that questioned the AstraZeneca vaccine. Do you remember that?
Was it a sitting MP or a candidate?
Sitting MP, I believe. Well, she'd have to be, because she questioned the vaccine, the AstraZeneca, while in office, and was her comments were very much publicly derided by many. And this journalist just said, well, she made the vaccine out to be dangerous, right? Which we all know the press and the media and the political class have gone out of their way to ensure public perception of vaccines is considered to be completely and utterly safe, which we clearly know there's not 100% safety with them, right? Excuse me. So that journalist asked that question, and Kevin Rudd just answered with complete and utter disdain for him as a journalist. You able to find it?
It's a candidate, not an MP.
Oh, okay.
Labour. Oh, wait. Sorry, it's sending me to different links. Yeah, it's candidate for Seth Higgins, Labour. Michelle Anada Rajaj, who's a doctor in Labour.
Right.
So I'm because that, yeah, I don't think any of the female MPs have called out the vaccine companies. I think it's only been Christensen and Kelly in the lower house and a couple of senators in the upper house, but I don't remember any women speaking out on it.
Interesting. Well, it just sort of further illustrates Kevin Rudd's disdain for the Murdoch media, and I to some degree I understand his stance against them. I understand they're not necessarily favourable to the Labor side of politics, but I know this for certain that the ABC is not favourable to the Liberals. So I was listening to Triple J at work the other day, and I'll never forget this. This is a youth radio, right? So they start them early. The news bulletin started with Scott Morrison was confronted with questions of why do people think you're a divisive character, right? He was questioned on whether he was keeping his Liberal Party solidified behind him. It then went on to announce a Labor Party campaign and policy, right, with no narrative at all. So the first question was, or the first part of the news was, why do people hate you, Scott? And then the second one was Labor Party policy. And it was just this complete sort of just narrative-driven approach to reporting the news. And this was the ABC, obviously Triple J Youth Radio. So anyone who tells you that Sky News is not biased, I think they're wrong. I think Sky News is biased, and I think ABC is also biased. And
they're all biased.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's okay, right? It's okay as long as you own your bias, right? And you don't pretend that you're neutral. And that's what the facade is with Kevin Rudd. He pretends that everyone is neutral except Murdoch media, right? And so that's why I can't stand him anymore. He's on a crusade to make our media landscape less democratic and less representative. That's what Kevin Rudd's his intent is these days, and I've got no time for it.
And yeah, yes, of course, the Murdoch press has some control. I can't speak to that too much because I'm so young. It obviously was before my time, a lot of it. But it's with the rise of digital media, the Murdoch press is even less control than they did beforehand.
Yes.
Plus Fairfax plus I think Fairfax is the second biggest private corporation, and that's not Murdoch.
And the ABC.
29%, I think, is Fairfax. And there's 30% of the control for Murdoch. But even then, with the rise of new media and independent journalism online as well, like the Herald Sun is online, but it's got a high paywall. So yes, it's Murdoch media, but you can't read it without having to subscribe in the first place.
Yeah, and ALN is a great example of the digital landscape and how it's evolving and new voices popping up, and the idea that you can shut the voices down because you don't like their content. It astounds me that people subscribe to that thinking, that they don't see the danger of that thinking. But yeah, the ABC is a juggernaut in the Australian media landscape, and pretending that there is no bias is just silly and ridiculous, and can be objectively proven, as I just laid out with the Triple J announcement. I just, lastly on this, I believe that personally, I grew up on the ABC and ABC Media, and I do believe that it was a systematic sort of way of sculpting my view of the world, and I'm kind of challenged on this idea because, to some degree, I think that we need some level of way to keep us cohesive as a nation, right? To sculpt our values and principles as a people, as a country. That there needs to be some mechanism for doing that, or teaching that, and whether or not that's through our government media and how that translates down the line, I don't know. But I do believe that I was sculpted into seeing the world through a very progressive leftist view, that I still hold some of those views to this day. But to deny that it is shaped in that way, I think is ignorant at best.
And they didn't even get started on the SBS as well, which is even more biased and also state funded. I've gone into looking at that Labor candidate, what seat she's running in. She's running in Higgins, which is Katie Allen's seat, which is very surprising. Now, Katie Allen is a doctor as well, who has supported the COVID tyranny regime. So to see a Liberal being pro-COVID tyranny and a Labor anti-COVID tyranny is the opposite of what the Liberal Party claims to be. According to Scott Morrison, Labor is pro-tyranny and Liberals aren't. But the Liberal doctor has been done the exact opposite and supported the COVID regimes, compared to the Labor candidate who's been very opposed to it.
I don't know if she's been very opposed. I think she's walked those statements back about AstraZeneca. I'm not 100% sure, but I do think they were very tepid statements. I'm not 100% sure.
Yes, it was, from what I remember, it was quite mild, but it's also Labor.
Yeah, that's true.
The fact that a Labor candidate was going to say this, and even if she's walked them back, the fact she said them in the first place, being from Labor, does say something.
Agree, and it kind of speaks to where we are now. I don't know if you've seen the latest poll, but it's even a worse scenario for the Liberals than last week. I believe the news poll is now increased margin for a Labor victory. It looks like
is it double digit? I think.
No,
double digit percentage.
I don't think it was double digits, but it was 54-46. I think I want to say the last news poll. They were saying a 10 seat win for the Labor Party. But I'm not 100% sure on that. It's definitely not looking good for the Liberals and Scott Morrison, and rightfully so, because how can they claim to be the party of liberty or liberalism if they're going to be part of a health regime that mandates your personal health choice? It doesn't make any sense. They didn't stand up to any of it, and so they've got no real grounds in those values, no foundations in those values anymore. And people need to look to the minor parties.
I've gone to news.com.au and their figures are saying for two-party preferred, it's 54-46.
Right.
But for primary vote, it's 35-38. 35
Right.
Liberal, 38 Labor. So that's pretty low
Right.
primary. That's pretty low primary vote figures.
For
It's
both,
usually
or
not that low. For both parties, it's in the mid to high 30s, 35 and 38, which is quite
so
low.
what would you expect normally?
Usually, you expect around 40, I think, from memory.
Yeah.
In the 40s. But
I
with
guess
it being that low, it's very odd.
I guess what we can take away from that is a hope that we have some minor parties in the mix here, balance of power scenario. Lib Dems get a bit of a run. I know I'll be putting the Lib Dems on the ballot for myself in Victoria, and hoping that they get some representation on the board. I haven't been following Topher Field. Is it Topher Field? His campaign. So. Yeah, he's running in Tasmania as one of the higher profile candidates. There's of course everybody's favourite libertarian, Campbell Newman, is running in your state of Queensland. So
don't get me started on this. I'm not in the mood to discuss Campbell Newman today. I don't want to discuss him.
Well, with high profile candidates running, who, what hope have we got? But I do get the sense that the Liberal Democrats the best chance they've got is now, right, to get a few seats in the Senate. So fingers crossed that comes through next week. Based on those low primary votes for the majors, those votes need to go somewhere, or people are just going to donkey, I guess. I was considering donkeying voting just because I was a little concerned with people like Campbell representing the Liberal Democrats, but I'm in Victoria still. I haven't moved yet, so I can safely say that I'll put a vote for the Liberal Democrats in, and those people will better represent my worldview at this stage.
I've got the primary vote figures from last election. It was 38% Liberal, 36% Labor for primary vote. So Labor's gone up, Liberals have gone down.
Labor's gone down 2 points, and
Labor's gone down 2. Liberals have gone down 3.
Labor's gone up. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So Labor's gone up, Liberals gone down. But yeah, usually you expect around 40. Yeah.
You do get the sense that this is nothing to do with policy and everything to do with people just being fed up and wanting change. At the end of the day, people just want to flip the table over because they've had enough. And who could blame them? We've had 9 years of, I want to say it's 9 years of Liberal federal.
Yeah, 9 years.
Liberal national
2013.
rule. Yeah. And, people are just like, yeah, there's something new. What can go wrong? Chinese vessels invading territory. What could go wrong, Stu? Right? It's just, what are you going to do?
Yeah. It is. Yeah.
Just to move on from that, I wanted to talk about, something I think we're really lacking in Australia, which is kind of a political standout person who kind of stands up to the crowd and gives the people someone to look to and someone to get behind. And in the US, that person is Rand Paul right now, championing rational liberal values of and sort of putting the idea that we have to protect our sovereign interests first. Right now, the military-industrial complex in the US is completely frustrated by one man, Rand Paul, who has put a stop to, or at least blocked, $40 billion of funding for the Ukraine war. And Against the backdrop of the 8.3% inflation, against the backdrop of shortages in baby formula, all these societal pressures, there's supply chain issues, shortages, fuel prices are through the roof. And, we've seen the governments print money like they're going out of style. And then what do we do? What is the government? What is the political class? That's the way they should be called, the political asses. What do? They put $40 billion on the table for weapons of war in the Ukraine to fight this proxy war that no one voted to be in, and that is just now, it's just, I thought of this yesterday. Proxy wars used to be subversive, used to be under the radar, right? It was kind of like the CIA is doing its thing over there. Don't worry, everybody. It's you kind of didn't know it was happening. Now we've hit this level where it's openly a proxy war, supported by a majority of the US political class, and at least we know the Democrat sort of voter base is behind this. We know the MAGA people aren't very into foreign intervention wars, but the sort of the rhinos like Dan Crenshaw and are in behind proxy wars to defeat the perennial eternal enemy that is Russia. But yeah, one man, Rand Paul, has somehow, and I'm not quite sure of the details in terms of the legislative process and the political machinations, but he has put a block on that $40 billion. And I think it's a great thing that he's been able to sort of single-handedly get in the way of this, what can only be unfathomable, this printing of money for war when the country is clearly in a sort of downfall economically. What do you make of it?
Look, the fact that Twitter cost Elon Musk $44 billion, and the US government is going to pay Ukraine $40 billion, but the left is only saying that Elon Musk is doing that. Like the left is saying, Elon Musk, why aren't you, trying to solve world poverty or world hunger? Yeah. The US government is doing this. Like the UN told Elon Musk, it's like $6 billion is all we need to solve world hunger. Right. The US government is giving $40 billion to Ukraine, and they're fine.
Yeah, that's right.
But how many of those politicians, would give their own money? They're giving our money, they're not giving their own money to Ukraine. How many of them would take their money out of their own pockets? I'm sure some of them are worth like $40 billion. Like, why aren't they taking that out of their own checkbooks? Why are they making us use taxpayer dollars?
Isn't it even more pernicious than that? In that there's the military-industrial complex funds political class, right? So we're seeing basically the pilfering of the taxpayer going from the political class through the legislative process into the military-industrial complex, which then goes to lobby the political class with funds for their campaigns and through probably all kinds of back channels to bring wealth to that class of people through war, through death, through dead babies, through starvation and poverty and absolute tragedy. The US government is the biggest weapon of war the world has ever seen, the biggest merchant of death the world has ever seen. And where we see them as a people and we love their ideals. It's this real dichotomy because their ideals and their constitution and their principles that country was founded on are some of the best ideas that have ever been devised. And I aspire to them. But then somehow it's been grown over time into this just absolute behemoth of devastation and destruction. And reining it in seems like mission impossible right now.
Speaking of reining it in, The situation right now with Catherine Deves.
Right, you're reining it in, yes.
Yes, she's in trouble now for being anti-transgender, but in a weird way. She compared being anti-transgender to being anti-Nazi. So she said that if you're resisting the transgender narrative, you are like resisting the Nazis, basically. So speaking of the narrative that being so basically, if you speak out against gender transition, it's a good thing because it means you're anti-Nazi. So again, we're seeing the Nazi narrative put up again. Speaking like Ukraine, for example, if you're anti-war, if you're anti that war, you're a Nazi. But now they're saying that supporting transgender gender transformation is also a pro-Nazi thing to do. Everyone's saying pro-Nazi this, pro-Nazi that. It's like just the term's lost all meaning.
It has lost all meaning. I think that's part of the problem.
It's like Murdoch Media. Saying Murdoch Media has lost all meaning because Kevin Rudd uses it so much that it's like, what does it even mean anymore? It's basically Kevin Rudd uses Murdoch Media like Trump says fake news.
Yeah, exactly. That's an interesting take from Catherine Deves. I haven't been following the issue closely, but I know she courted controversy, basically questioning the narrative around the trans debate and I think potentially standing up for sports and female representation in sports. I thought she was fairly moderate on this issue. That sounds like she's trolling. That sounds like
she said it's mutilation to get gender reassignment, and she's in trouble as well because there was a Western Australia court order that said that a child had to be removed from their parents over the transgender issue. The child was transgender, the parents didn't like it, so the court said, we'll take the child from you. And then she compared that to the stolen generations.
Yeah. Careful now, Catherine. You can't you can't go culturally appropriating issues like that. That's the thing. She sounds like she's turning into the Australian Marjorie Taylor Greene by basically just treading on those hot topics, those hot button issues that people get instantly emotionally reactive to. And it's just not sophisticated politics. It is good way to grow your brand if that's what she's trying to do. And best of luck to her. I wouldn't describe those issues like that, but I would say that, in my view, there is no such thing as carving up a person's genitalia to change their gender. It's just the science is not there yet. Like you can't build human anatomy to that degree. It's not sophisticated enough. So mutilation is probably a more descriptive term for what they do in those gender assignment surgeries. I don't think anybody, and this is the thing, how do we assess the success of those surgeries? What's the measuring stick? Who's defining what success is? And what is the goal? Is the goal to be a functioning member of the reproductive gene pool? Because I think you're failing on basic biology on that kind of a measure. So I am a firm believer in female sports being protected, and I don't want to live in a world. Speaking of which has confusion. I don't want to live in a world that doesn't know what men and women are. And I don't want that for my children. I want to have a world that has some basic standards that we can all sort of understand and interact with each other. And that's basically where I stand on this issue. I don't want to live in that confused dysphoria that for everybody. I don't think that's what we're trying to achieve here as a society. And it would seem that one side of politics wants everybody to subscribe to dysphoria gender dysphoria as the standard of being, and that's not how I see it. So Catherine Deves, I think she'll probably have a certain amount of success in taking this issue on, because there is a massive disconnect between the population and how they perceive the issue, and I believe they see it mostly like the way I see it, which is that we have biology and that these the genders exist and all those sort of things. Those are fairly common beliefs that are really out of proportion or disproportionately represented in the media and the political class. They're not connected very well to what the population believes.
So she's running in Warringah, which is Tony Abbot's seat.
Right.
The MP is Zali Steagall.
Who's opposing her?
Yeah, so she's sitting MP independent. Zali she's currently the independent sitting in the seat. She used to be in Winter Olympics as a skier, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah,
I could be wrong, but I think she was the first female medalist in Australia for Winter Olympics.
Yeah.
And she has taken the opposite stance. Her stance has always been that people should be playing in the sports that they identify with, not the biological sport that they're. So the opposite stance.
Yeah, which is
weird because
ridiculous.
She's a female athlete, right? A female athlete who's saying, we should have men people who have the male hormones in female sports.
It's something you say when you're not trying to save sport, or you're not trying to promote sport for women, but you're trying to appease a political class of people. That's what you say if you're trying to be political, rather than promote sport and authenticity and meritocracy, right? Essentially, sport is the purest form of meritocracy. And so to say that you can just throw, males into female sports under basic parameters and sort of put some rules around it, well, you're ruining sport. I've said this before, that I think we're probably past the Olympics. Have probably got one more left before it's ruined by political ideology, and also technology, because I think we'll see, if we already haven't seen, which we probably have, is athletes have been genetically engineered already in China, and we're probably going to see more of that moving forward. And with the political ideology coming into play as well, no one will believe in the meritocracy that was once this grand institution of the Olympics. So we need people like Catherine Deves to be flying that flag. I'm not sure she's doing it in the way I would, but sports and that is such a cultural meeting place for everybody from every political standpoint. To tear it up is just such a dangerous. It's a dangerous evolution of our political landscape that seeks to really pull out the rug from under the society, that social fabric, and replace it with ideology. That's where we're going, and it's scary.
And the last issue I wanted to discuss on the stream is another cultural one. Is Mark? Speaking of being cancelled, Mark Latham. The Labour leader turned One Nation leader.
That's right.
And how's that for a political pivot, going from Labour to One Nation?
It was quite shocking when it happened.
Was he Labour leader against Howard? Was it?
Yes, 2004 election. I remember it well because that was kind of my year coming of age politically. There was Howard was legitimately a divisive character, mind you. Again, through the lens that I was sort of raised on, again through youth ABC content and media, I saw Howard as a very divisive character. I stand by that. I think he was somebody who used things like immigration in an underhanded way. It wasn't. There was absolute dishonesty in play. So people like Mark Latham were brought in because they were a bit punchy, right? Latham liked to throw a few right hooks into the mix, and we come off Kim Beazley, who was this sort of gentle giant. People compared him to Santa Claus. He was not somebody who necessarily projected strength or fight, which people like Donald Trump have come to symbolize. Latham was a Trump-esque character. I wouldn't say had anywhere near the persona of Trump, but he definitely had a fight in him. And so it's not surprising to me that he's come to this place where he is currently sitting in the One Nation camp and being quite aggressive and saying some provocative things. It sounds like he's said a few things that have gone a little too far, and he's a little bit teetering on the edge here. Did you want to go through the comments?
Yeah, so when we had the debate this week just gone, the last leaders debate for the election, the moderator was Sarah Abbo, who's an Aboriginal woman. But
her name is Abbo?
Her last name is Abbo. Her last name is Abbo, ABO. It is. And because, it was a bit of a chaotic debate, she struggled to keep control over it because Albanese and Morrison were at his throats the whole time. Which is, I guess, reflected in the polling afterwards, because the polling from people who watched it was split 50-50, Morrison and Albo. So it was a very, very divisive debate, the most divisive one so far of the campaign. And Mark Latham then said, on Twitter, he said, "Never trust an Abo with something as important as that."
Right. So I'm smiling because I didn't know her name was Abo, right? So I can see the joke now. Whereas you told me before we recorded, and I'm like, oh no, Mark, what are you doing? I don't, you've gone way too, there's a racist connotation there for sure. That should be, yeah. Look, I'm a bit of a libertarian when it comes to comedy. I'm kind of, that's my background. I met my fiance through comedy shows, and we used to go to the Melbourne International Comedy Festival every year. And you know what? Something like this would have flown 3 years ago, 2 years ago. It probably would even fly today, said by the right person, right? This is the key thing. It's almost like that word has the same connotation as the N word in the States. I'm not going to say it, just because, there's that word has the you can't say factor around it, right?
Well, I think the problem there is, I can see the word that the comedy is there. The issue is, he said an Abo, and playing that one of a bigger group.
Yeah.
So therefore, Aboriginal rather than being Abo being her last name. So it's a joke, yes, but by using the word "an" indicates that she's part of a bigger group of Aboriginals.
Look, all I would do,
people have then,
I wouldn't say it. I wouldn't say the joke, right? And I can understand why the reaction has been severe. But I would say that someone in the Aboriginal community could say that joke, right?
Yes.
And so you have that issue of, all right, so we just have speech now that's for some identities and some for others. And I don't subscribe to that idea. That seems to me arbitrary and based in ideology at the end of the day. So I support Mark Latham's right to make a joke. I do think that people's reactions are legitimate, and I just think, though, you know what, he's not hurting anybody. You have to be careful to not judge a person through something like this, rather based on their actions. And an example I would give you is Tony Abbott, who was perceived by many as having a very nationalistic, a very ethnocentric Anglo approach to politics. He's somebody who volunteered in Indigenous communities more so than any other politician. So, you know, I'm very conscious of judging people based on their actions and rather than their words. And Mark Latham has been very vocal about domestic violence issues in Indigenous communities in particular, and sort of vocalizing that idea that we're not addressing the real problems because of race, and that we're addressing it at this high level gender low resolution debate is being had in Australia based on feminist gender identity politics. And he's right. He's dead right on those issues. He's right in that, you know, we should be looking at protecting people in the Indigenous communities where the statistics are off the charts. So, you know, let's not judge Mark Latham on one joke, I would say, and let him engage in the political debate. And at the end of the day, it's a joke.
You know, I agree that I do agree with his right to say it. The issue that he gets is that he's not complaining that he's being cancelled for it. He knew what he was saying, and now he's upset.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Mark Latham can't really be cancelled from anything. He's in One Nation. They don't get media. They're no longer represented on mainstream corporate press. So
yeah, but even Sky cancelled him. Even Sky cancelled him.
Well, didn't they cancel his show a long time ago? I think Mark Latham has been persona non grata for a long time.
Yeah.
So he's just playing the role now. He is just playing that role and walking that walk. And to be honest with you, I think something like this is how he gets votes. You know, it's a bit sad, but he is a One Nation member at the end of the day. They are kind of the party of, you know, we're full, go away, to put it nicely.
Ben the Burkers.
Yeah, exactly. So they played race card. They've played the race issue for a long time in that party. So, you know, I was hoping to see them shake off some of that baggage. And I think Pauline has managed to sort of steer clear of some of those more divisive issues in the last couple of years. Maybe I'm wrong. You seem to react to that, but for instance, she wore that burqa, that stunt in Parliament. That was now going on 5-10 years ago, I want to say. So she hasn't really done anything that provocative. I think she's trying to broaden her image out. And, you know, God knows they've got enough to deal with the COVID regime to fuel their fires. They're very much focused on freedom these days, which is kind of interesting why Mark would tread into this sort of dangerous territory and such a hot button issue there.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think that's probably a good place to finish up on as well. If you had any final thoughts on this week as we go into the final stretch.
No, I mean, all I would say is people, if you're sitting on the fence, you don't know where to put your votes. As long as you're not in Queensland, vote for Liberal Democrats. If you are in Queensland,
I endorse that message.
Yeah, maybe go One Nation or I don't know, United Australia Party. Despite some of their horrendous populist policies, might be the best place to put it, just to throw some cat amongst the pigeons in the Parliament. Because right now we need disruptive forces against the majors, and that's where I'm hoping we end up next week with some disruptive forces in play.
Agreed.
Cool.
And make sure to join us next Saturday. We won't be doing a show at this time. We'll be doing election coverage instead. So Saturday night, 6 p.m. on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, we'll be doing a live stream coverage of the Australian election from a more independent, not corporate media angle. So make sure you guys don't miss that show next weekend. I'll put out more details as we get closer to the date.
Cool.
Other than that, thanks for watching, everyone.